Hi, welcome to this is a collab between myself, Tiffany from Makeup and Monarchies,
and Unholy Tudor. Unholy Tudor.
so today we're going to be talking about Mary Boleyn, who I think is under the radar a little bit, isn't as spoken about as much as her sister Anne. We'll start at the beginning, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Where's best than to start at the beginning?
All right. So, what year was she born in?
So they don't know exactly when she was born. The most likely date is between 1499 and 1504, as that's the same window for Anne Boleyn and George Boleyn as well.
In doing research on it, I did notice that I am actually doing my research on Anne. Their father, Thomas, had written something about the kids, that the kids were born prior to his father's death, which was in 1505. So I'm wondering if they were all like, if the 9901 and possibly '04 for George would be correct.
Yeah, I think that is most likely, as again, going back to Thomas Boleyn, he says she brought me a child every year before his father's death. So that is, they've all got to have been before 1505.
I agree. And it kind of puts us in a better timeline when Anne and Mary went to France and to Austria as well. They were, I mean, in '07, if Anne went to Austria in 15, was it 1515?
So Anne went to Mechlin, however you want to say it, in 1513, and she was in France by 1515.
Okay, so that would probably mean 13. She would have been 6. I can't see that happening.
No, I don't understand the theory of Anne being born in 1508 purely because they wouldn't have had a 6-year-old at court like that.
Right, I agree.
But I mean, they could have. They could have. It was different times. But I think to be a lady in waiting, you had to be at least 10 and up.
As that was the age of consent. I know 10 was the age of consent.
Yeah, once. I think off the top of my head, 6 were considered an adult in Tudor period, but for women you could be married from the ages 12 and up, so it made much more sense to be towards that age to go to court.
I agree. Now her mom, Elizabeth Howard, do we know a lot about her?
No, sadly the records are really scarce. There's a poem by the poet John Skelton praising her beauty, but she's fairly off the radar. The most we hear about Elizabeth is in Anne Boleyn's records. It's her accompanying Anne, but never when it's her and Mary, they're not linked together.
Okay. And the little bit we know about her is what line she comes from, correct? The Duke of Norfolk?
Yeah, so Elizabeth was a Howard, so she was from a really prestigious stock in England, whereas Thomas Boleyn was rarely new stock, they would say. So his granddad, Geoffrey Boleyn, was a mercer in 1431, but don't quote me on that, but it was the early 15th century, and so Elizabeth Howard was like a really prestigious match for the Boleyns, and really prestigious, but that's purely because of the downfall of the Howards in the downfall of Richard III going back 10 years earlier. But Mary, Elizabeth and George all had Howard blood running through their veins, so they were definitely of noble stock.
Okay. Now, I saw 2 things about her where she was born, either Hever or Blickling. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah.
So would that depend on what year she was born, where she was, or the year she was born depend on where she was born?
Yeah. So we know Thomas Boleyn moved to Hever in 1505, and prior to that he was at Blickling. So it is very much likely that all of the Boleyn children were born at Blickling.
Now we've talked a little bit about her siblings. It is believed she was the oldest, and then Anne or George?
I think it goes Mary, Anne and George.
Okay.
George seems to have been the youngest boy, especially because there is 2 Boleyn children that didn't survive, Thomas and Henry.
Okay. I also getting back to the when she was born and who was born in what order. There was something said about when Anne was born that they didn't make mention that she was the eldest. So that leads people to believe that she was not, that Mary was.
Yeah, I think Mary has got to have been the oldest purely because from my research, she made the prestigious first marriage to William Stafford, and she was also, although Anne went to the European countries first, Mary's first position at court was with the Queen of France, which is arguably more prestige than what Anne was doing.
Agreed. Now, why that leads me into our next topic. Why was she going to France?
So Mary was going to France to be in the train of Henry VIII's sister, another Mary, and she was marrying the King of France, Louis the 15th. No, it's not. It's Louis the 12th.
Yep.
Well, Mary, I think Mary Tudor was, I think, 18 at the time. She was very young compared to Louis the 12th, who was in his 50s, I think. But Mary was one of them,
Okay.
ladies in waiting.
Would Mary Tudor have known Mary Boleyn prior to her going to France?
Most likely not. I think this was probably Mary's first appearance at court, if not maybe in the train of Catherine of Aragon at some point.
Yep. So Louis dies, right? Yep. And then Mary Tudor is left Dowager Queen. I'm going to say Dowager Queen. So then Francis I takes over with his wife, Claude. Now, was Claude, I have a point to me getting here, was Claude Louis's daughter? I didn't go deep into that.
Yeah, so Claude was Louis's daughter. So the claim was pretty much through Claude, I think. I think Claude and Francis were cousins of a degree.
Yes. Yep. I did see that Francis was a cousin of Louis. So that would put Claude and Francis as cousins.
Yeah.
That whole thing, first cousin, second, once removed into second, I'm not, cousins, So Mary stayed at court under Claude.
So Mary didn't. Mary went back home with Mary Tudor.
Okay.
So it's only so Anne leaves Mechlin to join Mary, her sister, and in the train of Mary, Queen of France at the time.
Yeah.
But Mary goes back
in 1519, I believe.
So I think it's believed Mary went back in 1515, so really early. Now, we don't know why she went so early. There is rumours that Mary was the mistress of Francis I.
Yeah.
So there might have been an altercation between them, and Mary probably fled.
That's what I was thinking, because he did have a nickname for her, which
he called her the English Mare, I believe.
Yeah. I did touch upon that a little bit in my Anne Boleyn. If you want to say it's derogatory, I find it humorous, but reasons why he would call her that.
I think it's just such a man thing to say at the time.
Yes. So she was in France for about 5 years.
No, sorry. Mary was possibly in France for about 8 months at most.
Mary Boleyn?
Mary Boleyn, as Mary Tudor was in mourning in, I can't remember what the building's called. I think it's St. Denis. And Charles Brandon comes from England to collect her, and they get married and they come back to England, and Mary is in that train. So Anne is left in France until 1522.
Yeah.
And Mary is married and in the train of Queen Catherine by 1522.
Right. Okay. So now Mary gets back to England, and she is betrothed. I'm either 1518, 1519 to William Carey.
Yeah. So Mary's been betrothed to William Carey. So by 1519, she's probably been in the train of Queen Catherine of Aragon for at least 4 years by this point. Or she was possibly, as we don't because there are no, like, definite records. She could have stayed in the train of Mary, Dowager Queen of France. There's a high possibility for that. But we know by 1522 she was definitely in the train of Queen Catherine.
Yep. Now, William Carey, was he already at court serving under Henry as a court, I'm going to say courtier, am I right in that? Was he already in there, or did that happen after the marriage?
I think he was at court and he had more titles once he was married to Mary.
Okay. Now, where did he come from? Do you know his background or why him?
I don't know too much about William Carey. I know he lived in Essex, I want to say, in Rochford Hall. I think it was Rochford Hall. But he was very similar to the Boleyns, that Kent area. So they probably knew him. He wasn't a stranger. And he was a fairly good match. He was rising in the court of Henry VIII, so Mary would be comfortable. But I think William Carey wasn't prestigious family,
Okay.
from what I know.
Okay. I feel like doing research on during the War of the Roses when Edward was king, Edward IV. There were less of these families that had prominent status. I feel like once Henry VII came in, it was like we saw this rise of all these different families that all of a sudden got a higher status. Would you agree with that, or were they more underlined and weren't given as much?
I think the War of the Roses was such an unstable time, and I think whatever side you were on, you were seen to be on the wrong side.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once Henry VII became king, he wanted as many people as possible on his side. He wanted to be the strongest king possible. So I think he tried to be lenient as possible. But as we know, Henry VII was really paranoid.
Yeah. And rightfully so. I mean, what he walked into, excuse my language, but like a plate of shit, like, how do I fix this situation,
No, absolutely. I think Henry VII didn't have a good time, but he did set the foundations for England. So we know that when Mary was born, she was in a pretty stable country compared to what her father would have been born into.
Yes. So they were married in 1520. Catherine of Aragon and Henry were at their wedding.
Yes, so this was a really high mark of favour, and it was either done as a nod to William, but most likely it was to Thomas Boleyn and his loyal service.
Okay.
And we know by 1520 as well that they are definitely married because they are together at the Field of the Cloth of Gold in June of that year.
They were both working for court, correct?
Yeah, they were both. So William was then for the king and
Yep.
Mary was for Queen Catherine.
Okay. So now I'm curious. We're going to move on to adulterous things. Apparently there was an affair. I don't want to say there was, because is it recorded? Were we there? No. But it's well rumored. Am I correct in saying that?
No, absolutely. You're really correct in saying that. So in the 1520s, we don't know that there's been an affair that's gone on until I think it's 1533/1534 when Anne is queen, and there is rumours that Henry VIII has slept with Anne and Mary's mother, Elizabeth, and he apparently says not the mother but the sister. And in the divorce of 1528 to 1533, all them years of dragging on a divorce, he states in it that would he be free to marry someone else knowing a relative carnally. So it's a high indicator that he probably did have an affair with Mary.
Now it's rumored King Henry the hypocrite. It's rumored that it started in 1520, 21, 22, and lasted to 24, 25.
Yeah, I find issue with that. I don't think Henry was anywhere near capable of being that faithful for that long.
I agree.
I I think it was most likely 1523 to 1524 because I do have a slight inkling that Catherine, who is Catherine Carey, is Henry VIII's daughter.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I really believe that. I don't think the son is. I think it's too late, but I definitely think
Hmm?
Catherine Carey is Henry VIII's.
Do you? So I don't think either one of them are his. Why do you think that she is? The
I think
timing?
the dates add up, but also because of what is said about Catherine Carey when she's older. Compared to Elizabeth I, they are called the absolute spit of each other.
Yeah.
And it's either because obviously they're family anyway, so they're going to have similar resemblances, but apparently they look like sisters.
Catherine's hair was lighter, correct?
I think so. I think she was more like, not ginger, but
You can say ginger. Like a strawberry blonde.
yeah, very much a strawberry blonde.
So that would almost indicate that she could very much well be Henry's.
Absolutely. I think there is a high possibility if the affair took place then.
Now, do we know anything? Now I'm going to be a hairdresser first, or hairstylist for a second. Do we know, was Mary a brunette as well, like her sister?
So in recent, media, it's that she's blonde or she's got raven hair, but she probably had brown hair,
Okay.
from what I think.
So I ask because, well, I mean, it could. So typically, when you have a redhead, both parents have to have that gene in order for the child. It's a recessive gene.
Right,
So
okay.
both parents have to have that gene. So maybe because we saw Elizabeth have red hair.
Yeah, we saw Elizabeth have red hair, so
And
she,
if Anne had the gene, then Mary had it too.
yeah, I think Elizabeth Boleyn was auburn haired,
Okay.
as I think that was common hair to have in them days.
Yeah, back then it what I think it was. Well, they say it's a dying gene, but and I've told both my children because they're both redheads. I've told both of them they have to marry either blondes or redheads because we have to keep the gene alive. Um, that's my prerequisite for any daughter or son-in-laws I get. I very much well. I do not think the son was. I'm going to agree with that 100%.
I think it's too late. I think if I'm right, he was born in 1526, and we know definitely by then that Henry was all for Anne.
Yes. And um he did not, if he was his, he did not acknowledge him the way that he acknowledged Henry Fitzroy. Now, being as son hungry as Henry was, I would find it extremely unlikely for him not to declare that his son.
No, absolutely. I think if that was if that was his, he would be like, "Look, I can give two boys. What?
I'm not the problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not the problem." But I
Even though,
think,
spoiler alert, he was, but
yeah, spoiler. But I think if Catherine it was his, and he knew that, he was like, "I've already had a girl. I don't care."
yeah. And what is he going to do with her? I mean, like, I don't want to sound like,
There's nothing he could do.
right,
Mary's married, so automatically gets the name Catherine Carey.
right. Okay. Where did Anne's rise leave Mary?
So in the late 1520s, it seems that Anne does try to be there for Mary quite a bit, from what I've read. William Carey sadly dies in the year of 1528 due to sweating sickness, which Anne and Thomas Boleyn also had. So, but this left Mary quite vulnerable. And it was very interesting, but well, it's not interesting, it's quite weird really, but Thomas Boleyn refuses to provide for his daughter. So says she is old enough to do it herself, and Anne petitions the king to get Thomas to give her an allowance for the year. And Anne is also granted the wardship of Mary's son. Now, in the other Boleyn girl, this is like seen as a real slight that Anne has done this. It's actually one of the best things that probably could have been done, because then that boy is kept in the family.
Well, Mary was almost left like penniless after William dies, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. She was in no position whatsoever, which seems odd in my opinion. You'd think it should be comfortable, but it seems to have all gone to the children, so she couldn't go, can I have some? She had to look after some lands, and that was it.
Okay. Now the sweating sickness, I got asked this from a client at work. She said, "What was it? What was the sweating sick?" I was like, "Literally, what it sounds like. You just high fever, sweating, and I think they died from dehydration."
Yeah, I think the cause was dehydration because
Yeah,
they just drank beer.
which dehydrates the hell out of you, anyways. But um, yeah, I wonder because I mean, if you had high fever and sweating profusely and you're not intaking enough water, I mean, and at the time was, the water probably wasn't the
No.
cleanest, right? Not with the filters like we have now. So I wonder if they just stayed away from the water. So what are you going to do, right?
No, absolutely. So the sweating sickness again is there's not a lot about it, but you would be dead within a day, and it probably is most likely to dehydration. And I think it's the whole theory about miasma as well.
Okay. Um, so we now with little Henry, where did he go to school?
So Henry was brought up with some of the other not royal, but the kids at court. He was most likely brought up with them to get the best education possible.
Okay. Now, and then what about Mary during Anne's years as queen?
So we know Mary was definitely there at the beginning of Anne's reign. She was a lady in waiting for Anne, and she was there we think she was there for the birth of Elizabeth. But in 1534, she has her second marriage to William Stafford, which gets her banned from court.
Okay. That was where I was going to go next. He was a descendant of the Duke of Buckingham. So she marries him and leaves. And it seems as though that was a marriage of true love. I wonder if part of the banishment was because of his relative, because the Duke had been executed in 1521.
Yeah, so partly it was because he was seen as really beneath Mary, as obviously the Duke of Buckingham his line wasn't legitimised, but when you get all traitors and confiscated and all that, so he was seen really beneath her. And most likely on a personal level as well, Anne had probably just lost a baby, and Mary turned up to court heavily pregnant.
Talk about pissed.
Basically.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you think during Anne's fall? Like, was Mary like, I'm not even gonna deal, like I'm just gonna stay in my safe space and at home?
So we know that when Mary was banished from court, she sent a letter to Thomas Cromwell, Henry VIII's servant. Now I can't remember the details very well, but this is like one of our only pieces of paper that we've got Mary's real feelings on a piece of paper. And she wants to be forgiven by her family, and she asks him to beg the king to intercede for her because she knows Anne is less forgiving. So she knows her sister very well. But we don't know what Mary thought of the events of 1536. I mean, she was probably very sad, and she did reconnect with her father after the deaths of her siblings. We know that.
Because he left her Rochford Hall after he died, correct?
Yeah, he left her Rochford Hall. So we know they have got to have sorted things at least semi out. Since it was his only child, and yeah, I can't see the issue.
Now, what do you think her relationship was like with her family? I think Thomas favored Anne, obviously, right? Because she was that path was going to give him more than Mary would have.
Yeah, I think Mary was seen as useless.
Yeah, I agree.
And obviously that's horrible, but if she was a mistress of Henry VIII, it didn't give her anything. It didn't give her any lands, titles, favours. Whereas we know with Bessie Blount, mother of a bastard son, but it was still very good. And I think Mary was just seen as an utter disaster.
Like no use for you. Go live with your
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Now, her children, four possibly.
Yes. So she has the two with William Carey,
No,
and possibly two with William Stafford as well.
Edward. Yeah, Edward and
It,
one more.
I don't know why I'm getting the name Alice.
Yeah.
I think it's Alice.
Um. Oh, Anne. Anne.
Anne.
I
Sorry.
think.
Yeah.
Now, because when I was researching this, because of the timing, was that like kiss ass move on Mary's part to kind of gain favor with her sister again?
It was probably a bit of that, but I think it's very underestimated that Anne and Mary were probably very close. Probably very close. They lived in a very tight knit house, and I think it'd have been hard not to get along.
Okay. Anything else like that you?
I think Mary needs to be remembered for more than possibly sleeping with two kings.
I agree.
Her lineage was really excellent, and her children bring very close connections to history today, which which is really surprising because she's forgotten, but it's her line that succeeds in royal history today.
It is. So that went through her daughter Catherine, because Catherine was a favorite of Elizabeth. So we have higher standing, and then it went to Lettice Knowles, which was Catherine's daughter.
Yes.
So we have like a lot of it actually goes back into the Seymour family. Funny enough, I found that very interesting. Go through a little bit more of the recent, so we know where we got there. So, like I said, it was Mary, Catherine, Lettice, and then it's going to drop, and then it drops down to the Queen Mother. So it goes the Queen Mother Elizabeth, and then Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles, William, and then obviously Prince George. However, when William takes the throne, he will be a descendant from Mary on both sides of his parents. So Diana was also a descendant from Mary. So he'll be the first to have it from both.
Yeah, so obviously Elizabeth didn't have children. Anne's Elizabeth, so Anne Boleyn's line dies there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's carried on through Mary, and I think that should be remembered.
I agree. And actually, it's carried on through multiple. I mean, through Margaret Tudor too, and our monarch now is through Margaret Tudor as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many lineages of so many amazing women, and that's what needs to be remembered.
Yes, I agree. Would you say there was a sisterly bond between Anne and Mary?
Yeah, I think there was. Obviously, there's not a lot of information, but I think from what we know from what Anne did for Mary, there's got to have been, oh, she's my sister, so I'll just do it. But she didn't have to if she didn't want to. And she's the only one that really cared about her sister, and her own family didn't.
So I don't know if I want to think that they did, but I don't know if they really did. Only because they were apart for so long. You know what I mean? So in their those like formative years where you really grow attached to your sibling, like
Yeah.
teenage years, they weren't around each other. So I wonder if it was, I'm just wondering if that's like they obviously were there for each other, but was it because you had to be, or because you wanted to be? Because those are two different things.
Yeah, I think, they're not, it wasn't the sisterly bond we would see today. I don't think it was. I think what a lot of people forget is it was 500 years ago.
Mhm.
So relationships were very different. Marriages worked differently. Even if it was true love, it was a different league to today. I think Anne and Mary had affection for each other, but I also think they were total polar opposites as well. I think Anne was much more outgoing compared to Mary.
Yes. Like fight and go and stand on your own 2 feet. And Mary was more the wallflower.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
I
don't, and I don't think, no, it's fine. I'm sorry. I don't think they would have been texting each other every day, or FaceTime like what we do now with our sibling. I mean, I do that with my sister, but like, oh, you're my sister, I love you, I'll help you.
No, I don't think it was like that. I think obviously Anne is the only one that remembered Mary when everyone else was purposely not helping her. But I think they weren't best friends. I think obviously they spent so much time apart, as you say, and I think the final nail in the coffin was when Mary turned up to court massively pregnant. I think that really made a split between them. But yeah,
But we would see that today too, right? Because if you've been trying and trying and trying, and then you see your siblings show up, that's a gut punch, right?
yeah, absolutely. I think obviously it was 500 years ago, but they were still human. And that's how you have to see them. These are real people and it's real emotion. This is how they felt.
Yep.
I think Mary never wanted to be in the limelight. I don't think she wanted to be high up in favor. She just wanted a comfortable life.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Now, George, it's said from historian Lauren McKay that Anne and George were very close. Not
Yeah.
like in the Boleyn sister movie, but just close. And
Yeah,
what do you think that was?
I think I'm not saying Mary was stupid. I don't think she was stupid. But I think Anne and George were intellects. They loved music, they loved dance, they loved poetry, they loved writing. Whereas I think Mary had no interest in that. I think Mary was like a bit like Elizabeth Howard. She was a housewife.
I
I
was just going to say that to you. Yes.
I think that's what Mary was, which is absolutely no shame. But
Mm-hmm.
I think Anne and George really loved languages, music, poetry, whereas Mary is quite happy to stay at home with the children and sew.
Yep. And Anne and George were much like their father, because their father was involved, like his political career prior to the downfall of everything was going very well. So, I mean, I'm sure he's out there chit chatting and, making wheeling and dealing, just
Yeah,
like Anne
absolutely.
and George did.
Yeah, so Thomas Boleyn was and again he was highly intelligent. He could speak multiple languages, which in later life Elizabeth I, his granddaughter, could speak multiple languages. So they were really intelligent people, but that doesn't mean to say Mary wasn't, but she wasn't interested in learning. She didn't have the zeal for it like they did.
More of a homebody and just,
Yeah,
yep, like saw the drama and was like, I don't want any part of this. Yep.
yeah, I think she was like, no, thank you.
Yeah, you can't blame her, right? I mean, look, it didn't end well, so I don't blame her at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So Mary inherited Rochford Hall after, we said that earlier, after Thomas's death. So
Yes.
what happened after well, when did she die?
So Mary died not that long after. It
The
was in
father, right?
1542, I think. So we're thinking the year of Catherine Howard being executed for adultery.
Yep.
So Mary was quite young in terms of dying, possibly. We don't know what she died of. Possibly cancer, possibly she died in childbirth. We just don't know. But we know that William Stafford didn't marry for a few years after her death. So I think it was a genuine love match between them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Now, did he stay at Rochford after her death?
I don't think he did. I think it reverted back to the crown. I have a feeling it reverted back to the crown.
I did find that it was sold to Richard Rich, Lord Rich, in 15, I know that's a mouthful, in 1550. So, I mean, if it was so, I can't imagine them or William selling it, but that would lead me to believe that it did go back to the crown.
I think if it didn't go back to the crown, I don't think William had the funds to maintain such an estate.
It's expensive, and there's really nothing after Anne's execution on her. She lived a very quiet, simple life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, she was there for a family. She was a Boleyn, she was a team player, and she did to a degree. But I think once she saw what court did to her brother, her sister, her mum died. Her mum, Elizabeth Boleyn, most likely died of heartbreak because of what happened to her children. And Thomas Boleyn was the same, probably.
What year did Elizabeth die?
So Elizabeth died in 1538.
Mm.
And no, yes. And Thomas Boleyn died in 1539. So really not that long after Anne and George are executed.
So she was the last one standing.
So she was the last one standing.
Mm.
Actually, no, she wasn't. Thomas Boleyn's mum didn't die until 1541.
Oh, she lived to be real old for
Yeah.
then. I mean, for then.
No, absolutely. So we don't know if Mary had any contact with her grandmother in this time. As you say, Mary really went off the radar after Anne's execution, and I don't blame her whatsoever.
Okay. So this episode's fun fact about Mary is among the royal, ancestors that she produced or her descendants. That's the word I want. One of them also was Winston Churchill. And that's something I found like wild and would never have guessed it. But
so have a good one.
Thank you, you too.
Bye.
Bye.